All right, guys, it's time for the Next Level Guy Show, a men's interview, interest, and improvement-focused podcast featuring interviews with the greats from all industries to help you better your life. Each week, a new episode features an interview with one of the greats, covering all aspects of their story, from life hacks to tips and protocols that have allowed them to live life on the next level. We then highlight concrete action steps that you can use to improve your life. And now, your host, Ian Dawson McKay.
And today, I talked to Max Miller. Max is the creator and host of the viral digital series Tasting History with Max Miller on YouTube. Prior to his YouTube stardom, Max was an employee of Walt Disney Studios in the marketing and film distribution departments. When the COVID-19 stay-at-home order went into effect in Los Angeles, Max was furloughed and began turning his passion for historic dishes into a self-taped video series. Within weeks of his first video on YouTube, Max's channel and videos reached hundreds of thousands of viewers who wanted to learn more about historic dishes, and his channel exploded in popularity. Keeping the same level of quality in every video, Max goes into great detail on some amazing topics and also shows you how to cook these in a modern kitchen, as well as teaching you a lot about history as you go along. His new cookbook is a must-buy for anybody looking to level up their cooking skills and learn a whole lot of interesting history too. Max currently resides in Los Angeles, California with his husband Jose and their 2 cats. And now, let's get to the interview. Thank you so much for coming on. It's an absolute pleasure to feature somebody. I'm a big fan of your channel, because where else can you learn about the Titanic, Attila of the Hun, then you're on to like the Nazi Germany, Capone, all these amazing things. But for people who don't recognize you, how would you introduce yourself?
I would say that I am Max Miller. I have a YouTube channel and now a cookbook where I talk about history through food. Sometimes it's the history of the food. Sometimes it's the history of the people eating the food. And then I make the food.
Because I love the concept of it. And I think it's the first time I've ever seen somebody educate people on history by using food. It's such an amazing idea, but I was really surprised that when I looked into your inspirations, you've talked about the Great British Bake Off, then to Bill Nye, then to Disney. There's all these amazing things. I know you're probably fed up of telling people about this, but where does the passion for history and cooking come from?
The passion for history comes from forever ago. When I was a little kid, I think in large part it came from listening to my grandparents. My grandpa and my nana on my mom's side especially would just tell me stories of the Great Depression and World War II and what it was like growing up in the 1920s and 30s. And it was just such a foreign world to, an 8-year-old living in Phoenix in 1990 or whatever. But the way that they told it, I was able to be there. They were such good storytellers. And ever since then, I've always seen history just as stories. Now, sometimes it can be taught poorly, and then it's not a story. But if it's taught well, it's just stories. So it's like reading a novel. When it comes to cooking, it actually started with the Great British Bake Off. I've always been a fan of eating, but I had never baked or cooked anything until I saw that show. And I think it was, excuse me, the accessibility of that show. It's so different than an American cooking competition where it's like, take these 5 ingredients with squid ink and paper clips and make a gourmet meal. And it's like, oh, that's cool, but I'm not going to do that. Whereas the Great British Bake Off, especially in the early seasons, it was always something that you wanted to eat. And you could learn how to bake by watching the show. I don't think it's the case anymore, but especially when Mary Berry was still on it, they would talk about why a cake deflated, or why this bread was too dense, and how to fix it. And then they would actually have extra episodes called Masterclass, where they would literally teach you how to make something that they had made on the show. They also had history sections where they would talk about the history of the Battenberg cake or whatever they were making. And so that is what got me into it. I was like, oh, it's the history of what they're making. Now I want to make that. And so I just decided to learn how to bake, and watching that show was the first step in doing that.
I love it. I love how you use stories in your family, to sort of educate and entertain. And I think that's a great thing about humans is we have to, we learn best by telling stories.
Yeah.
And, I think it's something that you see in generations like grandparents, teaching their grandkids with stories to entertain and educate, etc. But use like food as like a delivery mechanism for your stories. Why did you go from that approach? Was it to combine the two loves, or have you always enjoyed looking into like the food and the culture and their attitude towards food?
No, it like I said, it really came with Great British Bake Off. Was I had never, I mean, all history has always entertained me, but it was them exploring food through history, and it was only, there are 2 minute segments on the show when they used to do that, and that. So then, when I started baking things and bringing them into work, I would kind of mimic that, and I would tell the history of whatever I was baking. And I soon graduated from the Great British Bake Off and what they were making, and started making all sorts of medieval dishes. And I would bring them into work and tell people the history. And because I've always liked telling people about history, and so this was kind of like, here's some, profiteroles and a lesson. So it's kind of sneak in the education there. And so I think that that's kind of where it came from. But I have always found just daily life, the mundane, very interesting when thinking about historical figures or just general populations of the past. So often history is just taught by the great events, and the great events are incredibly important, but it's also interesting to think, well, yes, there was the Battle of Waterloo, but I bet they got hungry beforehand and wanted to eat something, and just thinking of that, or the clothes that they were wearing. Gosh, how uncomfortable were their shoes walking, across the Russian tundra or whatever. It's those things that kind of help you put yourself into their shoes, I guess.
Because it is a great, like every episode I've looked, you go into such great detail. You show the Texas, that you discuss how things are, and you kind of weave it together in the story that doesn't just educate; it actually like inspires you to then want to know more about it. And like you're saying, put yourself in their place and want to find out more. But you're one of the few people I've ever met who have COVID to almost a thank in a way, because
Yeah.
you got furloughed during Disney. I mean, I'd had to take some time off, and it gave me a chance to sort of reset, catch up with my job, learn about the role more, etc. How do you think? Do you look at being made furlough now as a good thing? How did you struggle with that sort of loss of identity, getting put on furlough, and then kind of finding your, I don't know, your passion in YouTube?
Yeah. I mean, it was really hard at first because I loved my job at Disney. And so being furloughed was devastating in a way. And honestly, even years after the fact, because I haven't now worked there for 3 years, but until about a year ago, I still considered myself like a Disney employee, even though I wasn't. It was just so much of my identity, and my friends were there, and everything. But I I had to have something else to focus on. You know, we were all stuck in our houses. I was stuck in a little apartment, and I needed to stay out of Jose, my husband's hair, who was still working for Disney. And so I had Tasting History, which I had just started a couple weeks before. It just happened that I had started this project just before COVID hit. And so I was able to just fall into it, and like all of my time would go to this and taking walks around the neighborhood. But you know, obviously nobody was really watching in those first couple months, and so it was just something to keep me busy. But then very quickly it also became something to, you know, really celebrate when people did start watching, and it became so much more very quickly.
Because it's such a brave move at that time to kind of say, you know, I'm going to move away, I'm going to go and start my own thing. And, you know, I've seen a lot of people who have said, like, I had an idea for something. But the second COVID hit, they were like, no, I'm going to stay in my job. I'm going to stay where it's safe. How did you overcome that fear? Because to go from sort of like employee to entrepreneur, that's quite a scary jump. Was it just, you just kept going forward and suddenly this thing spiraled, or was it a plan to kind of build a business? How did you approach that?
So, I mean, it wasn't brave on my part because I had no say in it. I was furloughed. They said don't come to work anymore. So, you know, it wasn't that I had the option to stay at my job and I decided to leave. I was
Very good point.
I had nothing. I had no other options. And you know, it's not like anyone was hiring or anything like that, other than, you know, maybe food delivery or something. But this, after about a year, then Disney called me back and said, "Hey, theaters are reopening. Come on back to work." And that was a bit of a scary moment. Fortunately for me, Tasting History had taken off by then, so it was doing very well. And so while it was scary to say, "Sorry, Disney, I'm not coming back. I'm doing this full time," it it wasn't as scary as if it had just been still a passion project. It was a business by the time I had to make that decision.
No, I like the way you kind of looked at that as kind of like, I don't really have a choice, I'm going to go for it. And I think a lot of people get held back because they always fear, you know, the unknown. And, you know,
Yeah.
people say, oh, you know, sit down and write out what's worrying you and things like that. But a lot of times it's, you don't have an option just to go for it. Because you were self-taught, like, you know, you learned to bake through Mary Berry. I
Yep.
still love that connection. And, you know, you built your channel and you've learned how to edit and film, etc. What's that taught you about being sort of self-taught and, you know, sort of learning these skills and filling the knowledge gaps and stuff like that? How have you found that? What's it taught you about yourself?
Um, one things it's taught me is that I'm capable of doing pretty much anything in a mediocre way. Because one thing I have learned, especially when it comes to things like editing and whatnot, is there are other people who can do it so much better. Um, you know, lighting. I every single week still I struggle lighting myself before filming, working the camera, all of the technical aspects. It's just no matter how much time I put into it, I only have so much time because really I'm working on the content. Um, and so it makes me appreciate people who actually do that kind of thing for a living. And one thing I learned was when I was writing my cookbook, I very quickly learned that there was a skill that I needed that I couldn't fake, that I couldn't learn very quickly. And that is the art of actually writing a recipe. You know, and on the show, I talk through the recipe and what I'm doing and everything. it's a very different skill to put that down in writing so someone who is not there with you can recreate it. And so I ended up hiring someone, Anne Folkvine, to work on that with me. And that actually taught me that I need to do that more often. I need to hire, it wouldn't hurt to get some help with editing and lighting and some of that stuff. Granted, I haven't. I still do it all by myself, but I should eventually.
It's amazing, like, because when you watch the show and you think you're doing all this, like the depth of your research is amazing. The fact that you make these things or take like historical texts or weird ingredients and you bring it in with this modern kind of focus and you educate and you make it fun. Like every episode is a gem. Like it's hard to watch one episode. You want to go through your back catalogue, through the playlist, and you always find something new about life and like a part of history that you thought you knew well. And I love that you're going through food and you open up so many avenues to things. Why do you think you've been so successful? What do you think makes it so popular?
I think it's the story aspect. And, it is something that I didn't really, that I didn't know that I could do as well as I have. And I've gotten better, I feel. I go back and watch episodes from 2 years ago and it's like, wow, I think I've really improved in my storytelling capabilities. Everyone likes watching Game of Thrones and the Tudors and all of these things that are either historical or based in history. Game of Thrones is very much based in the conquest of England and the War of the Roses, but it's told as a story with an arc, with characters. And so I try to bring that to history, to whatever I'm talking about. Sometimes it's easier than others. But I think that that's kind of what has made it successful, is that it's not just a series of facts, or at least I try not to do that. There's an arc to it. Everyone likes stories, and I think that's what it is.
Because I love like when you're you're going through episodes and you're talking about like texts that you found, so you relate to like in the Hadrian's Wall episode, you were talking about like guy that was there looking after the pigs, and you brought the whole thing to life. And I love that when you're speaking, it's like you could feel like you were sitting having a beer with you while you're cooking, telling me about something. It's like a 1-to-1 basis, and it's nice to see that your personality on the show is the same, that it's you. And I think that's rare in a lot of YouTube. People have these sort of characters they play, and I love that you're you in social media and your show. And you're so warm and friendly, and and you're disgustingly happy with your partner. And as a very single person, that really bags me.
Yes. Yeah, I am not. I don't think I could keep up being someone totally different for very long. I'm just not that good of an actor, I realize. So just being myself on camera and kind of talking how I normally would is just more sustainable. Now, of course, you only see the best version of me on YouTube typically, but it is very much, it is not a character. It's it's just me talking the same way that I talked to my coworkers about history, the same way that I bore Jose with stories that I find interesting, and it is very much just me talking to someone across the kitchen table. That someone is a camera, of course, but still, whenever I film, I just picture my friend Maureen across from me, and I'm just talking to her. And I've had opportunities to make the production quality a lot better, and do a bigger kitchen and travel and stuff like that. And I am trying to do a little bit of that, especially the travel. But I don't really want to to change the fact that I am just sitting at a counter talking, because that is part of the charm that I found people enjoy. It is just
Definitely.
a conversation.
And I think that's something I loved about it. It was like you forget everything else. It's like you're speaking to me, or you're speaking to like Joneses or whoever is listening. And that connection is perfect. And, you improve the lighting, you improve the backgrounds and stuff like that. But you're the star of it, I think. And you're bringing us into this thing and you feel the passion that you have. And it inspires us to be interested in it. And you have an amazing way of doing it. But what has been something that you've looked into? I mean, you seem to really like the Titanic. You've got a series about the cooking stuff. Has there been something you've looked into or sort of gravitated towards, or has there been something that you've learned that has really surprised you, or sort of you've embraced more or wanted to learn more about by what you found out on the show?
So much. It's it's funny. The episodes that are the hardest for me are the ones that I don't know anything about. Say a dish from ancient China. I don't know a lot about the history. I don't know a lot about the cuisine. So, and a lot of it needs translating and everything. So it takes a lot more time to do it. But those are also the episodes I enjoy the most. They're the hardest, yet they're the most rewarding for me, because I'm getting to learn from scratch. And there's nothing I enjoy more than learning. And so, it's the most fun for me. And every single week, though, it's like there's a new topic. And so that is what I'm most interested in at any given time, what I am working on for the next episode. I never look back, or very, very rarely. Once in a while, I will, if I'm kind of stuck on, I don't know what to do an episode about or whatever, I'll just go kind of flip through old scripts and be like, oh yeah, there was this topic that I didn't get to delve into as much. But I have kind of this ability to get distracted very, very easily, because I get interested in whatever is put in front of me. So, often I'll be writing an episode and then I'll realize that I've started researching something totally different that'll be for a future episode, because I'm just interested in whatever is being, whatever I'm reading at the moment.
It's very easy, isn't it? It's like everybody told me that I had to niche down the podcast, and I'm like, no. Whatever I am interested in, I'm like, right, got to get him on, got to get her on. And before you know it, I can imagine it's the same for you. You're like 9 different journeys of strands of things you think, I'll pull on that. And it kind of leads on to the next kind of question. I was really interested in, there was that great saying that history is written by the winners, like Rome wiped Carthage off after like Hannibal, etc. So like there's a lot of things that kind of disappear because people didn't want so-and-so's teachings to be passed on, or, we've only got little bits of history or pottery, etc. How do you research these things? How do you take like a historical text, an old age concept, make it so that you can create it in a modern kitchen, add a Max sparkle to it, and then make weave a story around it? Because how do you learn enough about it to inspire and to create that kind of episode?
I don't know. Every week, it's kind of this. I start out with the same question: how am I going to possibly do this? It's funny. So you say history is written by the winners, and I do agree that is so often true. But for me, history is written by the people who write things down, because not the Mongolian Empire, they were the winners, but they didn't write anything down. So everything we know, or most of what we know about them, comes from the people they conquered who were writing things down. So most of it's not very flattering. And
That's a good
so I
point. I never thought of
usually,
that.
yeah, and it's not always the case, but it's usually the people who write things down. I mean, Pliny the Elder from ancient Rome, so much of his stuff is just ridiculous. Herodotus, I love Herodotus, but his history is mostly myth, but he wrote it down. And so that is what, becomes the truth to a degree. Um, and so I, that's what I gravitate toward, are those kind of first person accounts. And luckily with the internet and with different libraries and museums putting things online, you can get a hold of almost anything. Finding it is sometimes the hardest part, knowing what to look for, knowing what is out there. But I kind of keep a running list, and I'm always finding new sources and everything. And there is always a point in the week when I have to stop researching because I do an episode every week. And so I kind of know when I have enough, when I know enough about a topic that I can talk about it. I never know everything about the topic. And that's good because it allows me to make another episode in the future on that topic, because there's just always more information to mine. But figuring out exactly when I'm done learning is the hardest part. And usually it's simply because I have to film this tomorrow if I'm going to get a video up on Tuesday.
Because I can imagine how deep a rabbit hole some of this stuff can be. Like just some of like the snippet videos you do, and you're like, you could talk for hours on it, and I can see you're just getting started. That glint in your eye, and you're like, okay, this is going to be a playlist. This is going to be a series.
Yep.
Because you've got ones on pirates, war videos, obviously the Titanic series, which is so fascinating to see the quality of food that was, that I think we get shaped by films, and then when you see what they were actually served, or the Great Depression, like the meal trays, I was like, that looks really nice. We have these concepts in our head, and it's, how do you think sort of future generations are going to see the foods we have now? Because we look back and go, yeah, we're much healthier, but we've got processed foods, etc. How do you see like the foods of yesteryear shaping our modern foods, and how do you think we're going to be judged by the next generations?
I think that for the most part I hope we are judged pretty harshly, because I really hope that we do get back to more whole foods and cooking and everything. But I don't think that that's actually going to be the case. I think that food is going to continue because of the sheer quantity that has to be produced and the sheer pace that the world moves at. I think it's going to get worse and worse, and we'll just kind of keep falling down that rabbit hole. I hope I'm wrong, and I'm sure that in some, food is so diverse. In some places, it's very different, and of course, in some economic levels, it's very, very different. So, what you can afford on a certain salary is going to give you just a better quality of food. So, but I do think that the processed foods and everything, while the processes will change, I think that that's kind of here to stay. I don't think we'll ever go back to people always cooking and going to the grocery store. And I'm guilty of eating processed foods and just ordering out and everything like that. So I can't really say that it's terrible. It's just probably not ideal.
Yeah, cause I would love to say I haven't lived off ready meals for a while, but yeah. I was young once.
It's just too easy. It's a matter of convenience, and very rarely do people say, I'm going to do something that is harder than what I'm currently doing. I'm going to make my life a little more difficult. It just doesn't happen that way. Even though eating healthy and fresh is probably better in the long run, and most people think in the short run, myself included. So.
It's time for a quick break. There are millions of potential products to buy, so how do you know which ones are worth your hard-earned money? Simple. You go to nextlevelguy.com/affiliates and explore those that will transform and improve your life. You'll find deals, listener exclusives, and special offers with some great companies. Recommendations are 100% honest and only on items Ian has tried or believes in. The companies showcased will make you a better man in all areas of your life. Simply go to nextlevelguy.com/affiliates and level up.
So you do a lot of these amazing meals, and you bake and you make soups, and the Al Capone soup, for example, was one of the nicest looking soups. Never mind the whole gangster and the St. Valentine's Massacre, etc. And I was just looking at it going, I quite like this guy now.
Yeah.
So how have you found the doing that? Is there sure like an entry level methods of cooking, or have you found certain types of foods that you would recommend people to try who do want to move away from the processed food or the unhealthy options and start cooking a bit more and becoming I was going to say one with the food, but getting a bit more involved with their food and where it comes from, etc.
Yeah. Soups and stews are just the easiest and most forgiving thing to start with. There's little work that you have to do. It's usually just put everything into the pot and let it go. Time is the hardest thing. Is a lot of times you want to slow cook it or whatever. And if it's too salty, just add more water. If it's not salty enough, add more salt. It's so easy in that respect. I would say that don't start with baking. That's what I started with, but it is the most technical. It's the most frustrating. It's the most easily mess upable, easy to mess up. And you often don't realize that you've messed it up until after 6 hours of work has gone into a loaf of bread. It's the most rewarding for me, but it's also the most difficult. I do think that part of the thing that a lot of people have trouble with, and I had trouble with, one of the reasons that I gravitated toward baking rather than cooking, was the lack of specificity in so many cooking recipes. The two words that I just can't stand is to taste, even though sometimes I use that in recipes, but add blah, blah, blah to taste. Well, I don't know what it's supposed to taste like or whatever. Whereas with baking, it is exact quantities, exact measurements. And so that it's just a bit of a crutch. Whereas with cooking, it's easier to fix mistakes, but you have a lot more room for mistakes because, sometimes the rules just are a little more fluid.
Because there's I don't know if you know Sorted Food with like Ben Ebrel, etc.
Yeah.
And they look at that, what is it, 160-year-old cookbook? It's a French cookbook, and it's just a list of ingredients, and you have to literally go from like chapter to chapter as you find the sauces, and they just assume you know how to make it. And that's like my idea of hell. Like, I need to be seen it. I need to see the pictures and go, right, that's what I'm aiming for.
Yeah. Well, that's cookbooks throughout most of history. And it's because, with the exception of some mostly English, actually, cookbooks that were written for households, most cookbooks through history until around the mid 1800s were written for cooks. They were written for professional chefs in professional kitchens. And so you don't need to, say, make a beurre blanc, and then they know how to make the beurre blanc. They just needed to know that they're supposed to do it at this point in the recipe. But if you aren't a professional chef, you won't know what to do. So it's the audience is just a very different audience who is reading those recipes than if you picked up, a book by Ina Garten today, where she writes it for someone who doesn't necessarily know much about cooking.
Because that kind of actually leads us perfectly on. Because I mean, you've just you're bringing out your amazing looking cookbook. I mean, just
Yes.
reading it makes me salivate, and it's
Yes, I'm very
and
excited.
there's so many parts to that. It's just like, oh, that I can't wait for that. And how because your episodes are amazing. I can imagine it's become a process of you're trying to avoid that and lead people to not only understand the food but to make it. What went into your the process of this kind of bringing out your own cookbook and make it leading people into the history but also to make the foods? How did you pick the recipes? How did you kind of create the how-to as much as the story? How did you combine?
Yeah. So obviously the writing of the history had to be very different, because when I'm talking about the history in a show, it's a little more off the cuff, very conversational. It needs to be written in a different manner. So I kind of had to learn how to write history without being dry. I still want my personality in there, but it also can't be, exactly conversational. And because it is a cookbook and the publisher thinks of it as a cookbook, there's only a certain amount of history that I, could put in. I can't have 10 pages of history for every recipe. So there was kind of that, all right, what do I really want to talk about here? What's the story that I want to focus on? I can't meander like I often do in the episodes. The bulk of the work for me was really fine-tuning the recipes, because when I'm doing them for the episodes, it's very much, this is I do it very quickly. I try to follow the recipe from history, and sometimes I'll play with a few ingredients to make something so that it will work as a dish. But I'm tasting the dish for the first time very often at the end of the episode. I'm just tasting it that once, so it's not always perfect. It's sometimes things have gone wrong. Well, you can't do that in a cookbook. Things need to go right in the cookbook. So just testing the recipes, and luckily I have a group of fans on Patreon who tested a lot for me. So I would test it a few times, and once I thought that I had it, then I would give it to 10 of them and say, hey, can you follow my instructions and tell me what you come up with? And sometimes it was like, yes, this worked. And then sometimes I would get 10 different things back being like, this worked, this didn't, and it's also great because they're all at different levels of cooking expertise. So, I could write for multiple levels of home chef. That was the most labor intensive part. Determining what recipes I was going to do, a good portion of them are from the show, kind of things that I wanted to re-examine, that I wanted people really to make at home, like the semlor and the syllabub. Some are more difficult than others. Some are very, very simple. But then I also wanted to throw in a few that were kind of like, well, you're probably not going to make this at home, like hardtack. It's super simple and the history is fascinating, but nobody wants to eat hardtack. But it has to be in there because it is so interesting and it's kind of part of the show. And there are a few others, but most of them are quite delicious. And then there's a whole section, and they're intertwined, but there are a lot of new recipes as well that I'll probably end up making into episodes. I've actually got one that I am making into an episode. So because I didn't want to just have stuff from the show, partly because I wanted people to have something new, and partly because going back is something that I don't like necessarily doing. So I wanted new stuff in there as well, simply so it would be interesting to me to work on it.
I love how you're sort of bouncing off the audience and say, using their experience or interest to sort of see how it feeds back. Oh, I wish I was on your Patreon now, because
it's them, that group. I of course converse with a lot. but my audience just in general, whether it's on Discord or Reddit or in the YouTube comments or Facebook, the amount of information I'm able to get from my audience is invaluable. Whether that be on, what topic should I be making videos on? What interests you? Usually I end up just going with what interests me, but sometimes those two things converge. So many of my episodes have been somebody saying, hey, I would love to see an episode on blah, blah, blah. And then I'm like, oh, and I look up what that is. And I'm like, oh, this is fascinating. Yes, I'm going to fall down this rabbit hole. And then I'm also able to, less so now, but really when I started out, the audience was so important in getting my videos up to a quality, up to a higher standard, because, I had planned on making videos for a year before anyone would really watch them, because that's how many YouTubers start. You make 50 or 100 videos before you really find an audience. So you have that time to learn your editing, to learn your storytelling, your lighting, all of these kinds of things. I didn't have that because I was fortunate enough that the channel took off after about 4 months. And so very quickly I had, people sometimes nicely, sometimes not so nicely saying, your lighting sucks, your sound, blah, 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 why are you laughing at your own jokes? Why are you doing this? And so that I would make the change, or sometimes I would not. If I thought, what, actually, no, I like it the way that I do it, I'll keep it. But a lot of times, if a lot of people are saying something, you can probably rely on that criticism.
I love it because I can still remember some of my first negative comments. It was things like, I don't like his accent. And I remember trying to change it slightly. And then I thought,
Yeah,
it's the only one I've really got. The only one I've got. I can't really do anything about it. And what have you learned about food and like the importance it plays in culture? Because you see these foods especially in like the Asian communities, etc. Food has got such a prime place in like festivals and ceremonies, and there was always like food offerings to the gods and things like that. What have you found about the way food is played, or how we approach it in society? Has it changed over the generations, or have we focused on it more?
I mean, it's omnipresent in history, and that's kind of why it works for the show, because I can tell almost any story that I want and somehow link it back to food, because everyone eats. I found that in modern times, we don't have the same reverence for food that humans have until very, very recently, until like the last 70 years or so. For the majority of human history, the majority of a person's money was spent on food, not on housing, not on, not cars or clothes or anything. It was food. You look through history, and typically to buy a chicken would cost the equivalent of today $200, $300. Well, now
Jeez.
I can go down to the store and get a chicken for $6. So the food costs has just come down so much. And while there is still food scarcity in parts of the world, most of the Western world has plenty of it. And so there's just our being does not revolve around getting food the way that it used to. Granted, I think of food all day, but I am not thinking, am I going to be able to get food? So there's I think our appreciation of the work that goes into making it has really, really gone down, especially with machines and, just farming techniques today. Not everybody is going out and working in the fields all day and spending most of their time reaping and sowing. But I do think that food still maintains the communal nature that it always had. maybe to a degree less than in the past, but still, sitting around with your family and eating, it's just something that you do that with friends. It just brings people together to share that meal. I was recently in Morocco, and there was kind of a dish that just exemplified this. We were at our driver's house with his entire family, extended family. They all lived together, and they made couscous, and it was in a giant bowl, and everybody ate out of one bowl. Because I and my parents were there, we all ate with forks, but typically it's eaten with your hands. Everybody just grabs the piece and eats it out of one bowl, and it's so communal, more than almost any dish that I've ever had. The whole experience was just wonderful to see the whole family come together to basically eat out of one massive bowl of food. It was wonderful, and I think that experience is still with us. Maybe not exactly like that, but even just sharing a pizza, it's just such a way to bring people together.
I do love those kind of things where it's like a meal that brings a family together and everybody's, like mixing and mashing and like you're saying, having that kind of communal experience. Because unfortunately, a lot of us go to the, like pick up like a meal on the go, the drive through and all those sort of things. Was there times that you found food went from something just to sustain you, to fuel you, to suddenly the exuberance, the showing off? What is there a time period that you would go to show people when it became like, whoa, let's show off by having gooses inside of this and that, and because
Right.
people always think of Titanic because that's what we relate to, but is there a time period that you think of? Like, do you find the weird stuff, the things that like maybe the ancient Egyptian like slaves ate, or are you more interested in the more out there stuff? Do you have a favorite time period, or when did food become more of a like, look at me rather than a let's keep you alive kind of deal? I know there's about 50
Right.
questions in there, but
No, that's all right. Well, I think when it became a look at me rather than just keep me alive, I think that goes to before we were even human, because other animals, still hoard food to show their dominance over others, and that is exactly what humans have done for thousands of years. So I think that is a primeval kind of thing. The first time that somebody had two sheep instead of one, that was the first time that they lorded food over each other as a way to say, hey, I have more than I need, and that makes me better than you. Now I think that that gets to an extreme in ancient Rome, and especially in medieval Europe, when there were people with just so much wealth that it makes the wealthy today look not so wealthy. I mean, if you look at how much someone like William the Conqueror was worth, he literally owned England. He was in charge of all it, just so much wealth, and he just didn't have that much to spend it on. Today, you've got vacations and cars and all of this stuff. Back then, you had clothes, you had a castle, you had a private army, and you had food. And so people showed off with their food. And so, bringing spices from halfway around the world, it would be like bringing moon rocks back today. And having chefs that would create things like the cockatrice and just these showpieces on the dinner table. The medieval times were really, I feel, when that just got out of control. And it stayed out of control for most of the rest of history. I mean, the Renaissance, of course, each time period has their own flavor of outlandishness when it comes to food, but has always been a way to show off. Even today, just going to I can't remember, Salt Bay's restaurant and getting that like $2,000 golden hamburger or whatever that isn't actually supposed to even taste good, but it's just a way to be able to show off. It's no different than a private jet or a Lamborghini in many ways. It's a way to show your wealth, and I don't think it's going anywhere.
It's probably too, when you see like the small portions you get in some of these fancy places, I'd be like, yeah, give me, keep packing it on. Let's go.
Yeah.
Because for me, I mean, I was brought up in the Highlands of Scotland, so for me, it was like fresh fish, and you got a lot of like vegetables out the local area, etc. And I interviewed Dr. Mahmood Gamoon, and he's a gut specialist, and he was saying how our digestive like bacteria, etc., is shaped by the foods that our parents have ate, our grandparents, etc. We kind of we need that kind of food. And in the Hadrian's Wall episode, for example, when you're talking about Roman soldiers using the supply chains to order foods in from their like local communities, like their coming from wherever they were originally from, etc. How have you found that, like, people, have you found that your own style of food that you were brought up on, has this kind of opened up your eyes to different styles of food, your understanding of food, of your own culture, your own kind of foods, like your partner's kind of upbringing and his approach to foods, and what's doing the show taught you about these sort of things?
Yeah, I was very fortunate that my parents always had us trying new foods and different things, different types of cuisine. So, I haven't always just been a craft macaroni and cheese and fish sticks kind of guy, but so I've always enjoyed trying new things, but no matter how delicious something is, a new food is never going to give you the same feeling as the food that you ate when you were a kid that just makes you feel safe, and Heinz ketchup on French fries or whatever. It's the stuff that you grew up with has a different power over you, and that is something that is universal. I mean, Mexican food in general, I grew up eating a lot of Mexican food. I get a different feeling when I eat it. It's not necessarily that it tastes better, though it does, but it's also the feeling, the emotions that are attached to that food. And so I think that it's the same thing with the people at Hadrian's Wall. It's you can bring home to you with food.
Love it.
You're 2,000 miles away from Syria. You'll probably never be in Damascus again in your life, but to eat some of the same spices that just transport you. It's like that scene in Ratatouille when, the food critic eats the ratatouille and is transported back to his childhood. Food has that effect. Food and music, I think, both have that effect on us. I'm currently working on an episode on ice cream served to the U.S. Navy during World War II. And they went to great lengths to get these boys who were in the jungles of the South Pacific ice cream. And ice cream in the South Pacific does not last very long. But so they had to do a lot to get them ice cream, but it was just so important for them to have that as a way to remember home, remember the people that they were, fighting for and everything. And only food can kind of do that. And we put so much emphasis on that feeling. And I think it's for good reason, because it is important.
Because I think that definitely comes across in your channel, is that love for it, but it's the understanding, and it's like making people realize where our cultures came from and how it can bring us together and communities, and how it bonds us almost in a way, but how we can connect with one another through food. And it's, you go to a lot of these sort of like random places and you'll see how people share and connect with each other, and a lot of times it's like through communal meals and stuff like that, and it is beautiful. And that's what I love about your channel is you teach us and you open up our experiences to these things. But how on earth do you juggle this? I mean, you've got you've got your own like channel, you're doing content, you've got your own personal life, you've got this amazing relationship, you've got all these conflicting demands. How on earth? Because I struggle doing a full-time job in content creation, never mind editing, putting it out, social media. You just seem naturally perfect at this. Like, for somebody wanting to get to juggle these things, any tips? How can we survive?
No, it is not easy at all. It's sometimes overwhelming and super stressful. And, when I worked at Disney, I had my job and then I had my personal life. Well, tasting history is my personal life in a way. Everything I do kind of revolves around it. And I don't think that's necessarily a good or bad thing. I'm able to step away sometimes, but I'm never really able to get away from it. I'm always thinking about it. It's always on my mind. And, Jose is very involved in the back as well. So even when we're, off on vacation doing something, it's always kind of omnipresent, tasting history. But I do have to take time and be like, I am not creating anything this weekend. Like this weekend, I'm going home to Phoenix to be with my family for a few days, and I will not work. But the entire time I'll be thinking about the next episode and, other things like that. But I enjoy it, so that's okay. But it is hard to step away from it when it's something like this, especially when you're the only one kind of doing it. If I left Disney for a week, Disney would be fine. If I left Tasting History for a month, well, there would be no Tasting History. There would be no episodes coming out. There'd be nothing.
I know that feeling.
So it is very different. And so it's both extremely rewarding and extremely frustrating and exhausting sometimes. And I can see why creators experience burnout. I don't want to say I've ever been burned out, but there are definitely times when the wick is low, where there are times where it's like, okay, I'm working on an episode and I'm just not excited to be working right now. It's work. Where then there are weeks where all I want to do is sit and research and write and edit and everything. And it goes in waves. And I think that's just like everything else in your life. But you got to keep doing it. For me, I've never missed a Tuesday episode, but I kind of feel like it'll be like the gym. If I miss one, it's going to be real easy to miss 2 and 3. And so I just try not to miss one.
Beautiful advice, because it's like what they say about the heart rate monitor. If you try keep it in the middle and avoid the highs and the lows, you flatline, and that's you.
Yes, it's so true. Yeah, no, there are highs and there are lows, and overall, I enjoy them both. It's just that, and when there are lows, then when I do get back into the groove or whatever, it's even more rewarding. So there is that. One thing that used to really affect me that doesn't affect me as much now because I just don't pay as much attention to it. I still do, but not as much, is simply how a video is doing. It used to be that if a video flopped, I would be depressed for the next week and barely be able to work. And that it's still obviously upsetting. You put a lot of work into something and then it doesn't do well. But I don't pay as much attention to it. I'm kind of able to, after that first day, be like, that's out the door, moving on to the next. And I think that that's really important in content creation because it really is not a reflection on you, because some of my best episodes haven't done that well. and some of the ones that I think were not my best have done extremely well. So sometimes it's simply, what are people interested in at that moment that I happen to post? How's the algorithm doing? What else has been posted? There's so much that you have no control over that you just kind of got to be like, next, moving on.
It's good to know that feeling never goes away, because I'm like that just now.
Never goes away. Never goes away. But it does get easier to a degree, simply because you get overwhelmed with other things, and so you have to stop paying attention to it as much.
Well, I've got to have you back on, because I think we're just touching the surface. There's still thousands of questions. You're such a nice guy, and I'm gutted to end it, because I know we're taking time. But for those listening, I normally do like a kind of, what do you want? What should we take from this episode, or what's the most important message or points? What would you want people to take from this? But also, it's perfect time for a sale of the book. Why should we subscribe? Why should we buy the copy of the book? Because I cannot big up your channel more than I do, and I always recommend it to people. But for people who are listening, thinking, "What an awesome guy!" But I want to know more about the book. What can we take from this, and why should we buy the book?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like I always come back to stories. The book is filled with stories. Every recipe is a story, meaning that it's actually accompanied by a story from history that are interesting. And you don't have to be interested in everything, because I do bounce around so much. There's always some part of history or some part of cuisine that will interest you. If it's not, Japanese cuisine or whatever, maybe it's cuisine from Renaissance Italy, or something from the Civil War, the American Civil War, or whatever. That's kind of why I bounce around, is because I'm rarely interested in something for more than a couple weeks at any given time. So I'm always jumping to whatever is next. But it also means that there's something for everyone, because everybody eats, everybody has a history. And so there's something for everyone in the cookbook and on the show. And honestly, even if you don't cook, this is a cookbook that you could still have. There's enough in there that you could just sit down and read it as a series of stories and never cook one thing from it, and it would be just as rewarding.
So you're getting 2 books for the price of one. I love that.
Exactly.
And until we can do a round 2, until we can get the book and do all these amazing things, how can we follow you? How can we connect with you on social media and see this kind of amazing thing that you're building?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram, Tasting History with Max Miller, on Twitter, Tasting History 1. Both of those are the best way to kind of converse, and in the YouTube comments. I miss a lot of things simply because of the amount of stuff coming through, but I usually end up getting back to everyone eventually.
Well, that's it for another week, and thank you for listening. It's now time to take what you've learned and use it to develop and enhance your life with the key points mentioned. Listen, try it, embrace it, use it, and crush it. Now's your time to hit that next level in your life. If you liked this episode, then please leave a comment on the show notes or a review of the show on your podcast platform. Everything helps evolve the show. Until next week, keep seeking the next level in your life.